Okay, hi and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third day of the webinar, third and final day of this webinar. We hope you've enjoyed yourself so far. And without much further ado, I'll pass it on to Dr. Craig to begin the session.
Fantastic. Thank you. Good evening. Hope everybody is well. Thank you for emphasizing final. I know it's been a couple of difficult days. Tonight's going to be a little bit more lighthearted, even though we are talking about some reasonably serious stuff. I want to start off with a question that I received a couple of hours ago. Just let me share my screen with you guys. Here we go. Okay, so I actually got a question earlier this afternoon that related to last night. So I thought we'll address that first. I want to try and understand the question because I think it's simply subciting, but I just want to understand. So hopefully, I know the person who asked the question is here. If I get, or if I misinterpret your question, please do let me know exactly what was meant. Anyway, for references, is it adequate to directly quote the reference cited by a paper? I think what you're meaning is when you're citing, when you've read a paper that you have found beneficial, and inside that paper, there is a reference that you like that you would like to cite. Am I correct in my understanding of your question? Can you just say yes or no for me? Hopefully I am. If we are doing like that, there are two approaches to do it. You can just simply go and cite the original source based on the information you've got, or you can cite it within a citation. So XYZ cited within ABC, etc., etc. The question that you've got 1, 2, and 3 is the entire process necessary? Sometimes yes, because in order for that author to have got to their conclusions, they've read extensively as well. And the hope would be that you've also come across the same papers or publications to help you in your thinking. The challenge, or the most important part, is the accuracy of attribution of where the original source came from. Because if I write or if I quote somebody in my article, I might take that slightly out of context in terms of how you can then use it. But by going back to the absolute original article, you've got a better grasp on the context in which the quotation was made. So sometimes, yes, the necessity to trace back really does help make sure that you've got it appropriated well within the context that you've got. I think that addresses part 1 and part 2 of your question. Part 3, in our thesis, we are expected to use latest references, but after tracing back, most of the reference points come to the old reference. Is that an issue? It's not an issue, but what you should be focusing on is the judicial use of the most up-to-date that you can find. It will be expected that certain elements of what we want to use may be in papers 5, 10, or even more years old. And that's okay, but you've got to be sure to not, as a sort of a rule of thumb, not exceed 10% of your citations for older references. So references that are more than, say, 5, 6 years old, no more than 10% overall. We understand that at times you might want to go back We understand that at times there may not have been a development over the recent years, and in fact, you are that development. But we also recognize that it's important that you are using, or you are up to date with the most recent that you can as well. So my answer to your question is, it's not an issue, but you want to be very cautious about how many citations you have that are sort of slightly older sources and in what purposes you're using them. Okay, so I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight. Just give me a second. Okay. I want to do something a little bit different tonight. We've done a lot of, or I've done a lot of talking the last 2 nights. Tonight is going to be some activities, even though I am going to talk. I'm also going to start with the paraphrasing and unplagiarizing section, and then I will move into the explaining complex ideas, because in explaining complex ideas, I want to leave you with an activity, which is something that you can email to me a little bit later if you want to have some feedback or to, to share with me your ideas on that. So I want to start with unplagiarizing tonight. When I look at paraphrasing and unplagiarizing, we're really just trying to come into the same concept. And my objectives for this section are threefold. I want to understand how to deal with words and ideas of other people, other writers, effectively and efficiently. I want to know when to paraphrase, and to ensure it's done in a way that won't be seen as plagiarism. Sometimes quoting or citing individuals is far superior to paraphrasing. Other times the paraphrasing is actually more appropriate. And I want to focus on to know how to unplagiarize your work in a way that retains the structural integrity of the information. And what I mean by that is it's not only the content, the ideas that you put across in your writing, it also relates to the fact that your writing has a style. So if you've come to the earlier set of sessions or the freebie I gave a few months ago, I always talk about the fact that when you write, you have your very own style of writing. Each person is unique. Your writing is like your fingerprint. The choice of words, the phrases that you use, the structures that you tend to use, even the tone of the writing is somewhat unique to you. And that's how it becomes, from a pen and paper perspective, easy to see when you've plagiarized. If you've lectured at your university or even at college and you get students to do an essay, especially first year undergraduates, so much of what comes into the essay has been plagiarized, and it's simply just a copy and paste. But as you read, you notice a different type of tone or of style. You notice fewer mistakes. You notice a different pattern of grammar. For those of us who are old school like me, and those of you who have lectured, you'll start to see that. Now, when it comes into a dissertation, it's still very easy for an experienced writer and an experienced academic to be able to see, you know what, I can feel that this paragraph is not your style. It doesn't have your unique signature associated with it. So it's important that as we unplagiarize our work, that we still do it in a way that helps to retain our signature style, and that it sounds like we would have written it in the first place. So I'm just going to go through a few boring things, and then we'll get into the concepts of paraphrasing and unplagiarizing. So to avoid charges of plagiarism, you must not only document sources correctly using an appropriate style guide, so APA, Harvard, MLA, or whatever style your university requests. for both your reference list or bibliography, but you also must handle direct quotations and paraphrasing correctly. That is, you need to use your in-text citations, and you need to learn not to rely too heavily on the source of material when paraphrasing. The biggest mistake when paraphrasing is assuming that I change a few words. But in reality, changing a few words doesn't help to bring it into your own style, but it also doesn't help to remove the opportunity that you might be accused of plagiarism because you haven't sufficiently distanced your writing from the writing of what was there. Simply taking another writer's ideas, rephrasing them as one's own, can still be considered plagiarism as well. So that is where we have the challenge tonight. How do we take someone's work? How do we deconstruct it? Perhaps rethink the structure that it needs to be in, the choice of words that needs to be used. Put it back together so that it means the same thing, but looks completely different. It's like taking a Rubik's Cube and pulling it apart and putting it back together. At the end of the day, you want it to be a square. You want it to be the functional cube, but the colors might be in a different set of patterns. As a kid, I always remember, half the goal of the Rubik's Cube was to get every side the same color. The other half of the goal was to get the cross patches. So instead of making everything the same, I wanted to have certain color patterns on each one. Now, to me, that is paraphrasing, but in a physical form. Paraphrasing is going to be acceptable if we both intercept and synthesize the information from your sources. Rephrasing in your own words, adding citations at the sentence level, but it's not going to be acceptable if we simply copy and paste large chunks of an original source. Now, at undergraduate level, we're all taught, just acknowledge your sources. And this is probably a failure of the training that we get as students. But we're told acknowledge every source. That's fine. What we need to be taught is how to critically integrate and work with those sources so that they become, or we become, bigger than they are. The problem by just simply a copy and paste means we don't think through the concepts that we have. We don't think through the full meaning at every level. And most importantly, why the copy and paste is not only just a bad idea from a plagiarism perspective, but structurally, it means you have not taken ownership of your writing. Now, to be able to take someone else's words, to be able to think through how they can be re-explained in a way that reflects you, reflects the integrity of the information, that showcases us as communicators to be stronger. And part of, or the major element out of postgraduate PhD training and the experience is your ability to communicate to a variety of audiences through a variety of mechanisms. Okay, now for a lot of writers, especially those who are perhaps a little unfamiliar with some concepts in a particular field, learning how to paraphrase can actually be quite a daunting thing. So I'm going to try and make it simple tonight. We're going to do some activities, and then we're going to talk about those. Now, let's do a few basic things. A paraphrase is simply your own rendition of essential information, ideas expressed by someone else, presented in a new form. It's a legitimate way, when cited, to borrow from a source. And you're borrowing from the source to reinforce your points, your argument, your direction. but it's also a more detailed restatement than a summary, which focuses on a single idea. So a lot of earlier students, undergraduates, think that they need to summarize the sentence that they're borrowing, stealing, whatever. But actually, it's considerably more detailed, and you may, in fact, find yourself using more words than the original source. It's valuable because it is better than quoting information from an undistinguished passage. So we have a randomly appropriate journal article that probably is not significantly impactful, but it says something that we needed it to say, so we use it out of convenience. The problem with that is you then start to rely strongly, because you've used somebody else's words, you've started to rely strongly on less impressionable authors. Now, let's look at very quickly the difference between quoting and paraphrasing. If I am going to quote an author, I am wanting to make sure that that author is extremely credible within their field, i.e., that the name dropping that you're doing and the fact that you're using their specific words means that there is no possible way that your words would be better than theirs. Partly that's an element of respect. Partly it's also showcasing that their contribution is something that is a guidance for you. Now, if I get a mediocre author, it's fine. It doesn't mean you can't use them, but giving such credibility or giving such respect to a mediocre author actually suggests that you don't necessarily understand the roles and contributions others have made within your discipline. So I look at it from this way. I'm going to quote directly a top quality writer. I'm going to paraphrase others who are good, but who aren't considered the cutting edge within the field. Now, that's not the only way to look at this, but it certainly is a way to think about it. Because what we don't want to do is give too much credence to an average author, that later on someone will come back to you and say, oh, I noticed you quoted XYZ. What do you feel their leading contribution to the field has been? And this may be something that gets asked in your Viva. So when we look at who you cite, who you quote, who you paraphrase, we want to see that you also understand their overall value to the community of research that you are part of. Okay, my second point is we don't want our work to be too full of other people's words. So like I said before, you'll start to see almost a disjoint between your own sentence structure and others. But at the end of the day, your work needs to shine through on your analysis and your interpretation. Even when we're looking at the literature review, it is about your perspective and your development of how the different literature came through. So we're wanting to see your understanding. That means your words. So it's better for us as examiners, it's better for you as researchers to make sure that there is as much of you as possible into the work. It's also going to help you control the temptation to quote too much. Now, at an undergraduate level, or even when we're doing our masters, it was convenient to quote other people. Now we've got to really make sure we get out of that habit. So as we paraphrase more and as we start to develop our skills, what we find is that we rely less on other people's choice of word structure to determine our thinking. We start to rely more on our choice of word structure for that. Plus, the mental processes required for successful paraphrasing helps you to grasp the full meaning of the original. So, in fact, it is part of our learning process for ourselves. The more we can rework something, the more we show that we understand to ourselves. So, whether or not you even use it is irrelevant at this point. But what it does is it does help ensure that you have a full understanding of where you're going. So quoting versus paraphrasing, what's the difference? I've kind of really covered more than this, but there's just a couple of points to look through. When you find the perfect quote from a reliable source that fits your topic, supports your argument, lends authority, but it's too long. So this is 40 words or above and complex. You need to be able to look at some of the strategies. Now, here's the thing. When we are direct quoting individuals, we don't want it to be too much of their words on our page. We want a single or whatever point, maybe 1.2 points that are very defined and very clear. We might not want everything that is peripheral to them. So in this case, we've got to look at the fact that we might want to deconstruct the direct quotation and use phrases only of it. So the ellipsis, the 3 dots, helps us to be able to take out. The use of square brackets helps us to be able to include perhaps an element of our own perception of the value of what they've got, but still retaining the words they've got. The square brackets are also, I think, used if there is a spelling mistake in the original, if I remember correctly. The second option, though, is if you're finding that something is significantly long, and 40 words is not much. You'll see shortly in the activities that I've got, they're 40 words and above. Paraphrasing is going to become the option that you need to use. So a few do's and don'ts of paraphrasing. Do understand when to quote and when to paraphrase. So that relates not only to what I was talking about as the strength of the author, but it's also about the value of the words that are being contributed. If the words are written in such a way that you cannot possibly restate them in a better way, or that they're so well known within the field that this is the contribution, this is the line of thinking, or this is the pattern of communication of the individual. Quote. If you have the opportunity otherwise, then of course paraphrase. Do understand the purpose of paraphrasing. Okay, if you think paraphrasing is about rewriting ideas so you can avoid thinking for yourself, you're wrong. As a researcher, your job is to demonstrate that you understand the material that you've read by expressing it in other forms, adding to it, and so forth. So the purpose of paraphrasing is actually to draw together ideas from multiple sources to convey the information to your reader succinctly. But more importantly, it's actually to make sure that you fully understand what you're writing about, that you've got the information up here in your mind, that you're clear with it. And do understand the text that you are paraphrasing. Always understand the text clearly, otherwise you run the risk of relying on the original source text too closely. So the point of paraphrasing is you interpret the information you researched for your reader, explaining it as if you were speaking to a colleague or to a teacher. That is, paraphrasing is a skill that demonstrates one's understanding of the text. So make sure that, like I've just said, you do understand what it is being said, but you have to look at that in a different level. It also relates to the context of which it's in. Okay, and context can shift on many levels. Context can shift based on population samples, geography, even social conditions and temporal factors. So the fact that something was written 4 years ago is completely different to the context that we face exactly today. So when we do look at understanding the text, it's not only us knowing the words of that text, but it is also understanding the context in which that was written and the audience that it was intended for. A few do's and don'ts of paraphrasing. So don't start paraphrasing by picking up a thesaurus. Okay. To be honest, thesaurus is a very useful tool for a kid to learn vocabulary. But for us as adults, one, it already tells us we don't know the alternatives if we've got to look at something like a thesaurus for help. But it also gives very functional first degree and second degree functional alternatives to a word. And, it's much like us using Google Translate to pick something off the internet. We'll get an idea, but we won't get the nuances that come with it. So if we use a thesaurus to swap out a few words, we end up by doing what's called patch writing, which is just plagiarism again. You're simply changing a few words without really making sure that it's going to be ideal or ideally suited to the circumstances. Don't copy without quotation marks. So if you choose to keep a few phrases from the original source but paraphrase the rest, it's okay, but keep in mind that the phrasing from the source text still needs to be exactly within the quotation marks. So that's why patch writing doesn't work, because when you take out a few words and you swap them for something else, you're actually getting the same sentence structure. Now, this is where a program like Turnitin or something like that will pop in and will say, you've copied, because it's looking at not only the exact match of words, but it's looking at the matching of sentence structures on the whole. Now, that becomes an issue for us. Many people have asked over time, how do I cite myself in an article? And if you've published something, a software or a program like Turnitin is going to say it's a match. But the problem is it's how we think. It's what the predetermined structures are in our head. And the reason it comes through is you might have tried to make a few word changes, but at the end of the day, the way in which your sentences and your paragraphs are constructed follow particular patterns. And Turnitin and those type of programs are there to look at the patterns as well. And that's how you get caught out. So part of what you've also got to look at is making sure that whatever you use is going to be sufficiently changed that the pattern looks different. Now that's don't paraphrase too closely. It's really easy to change a few words, to flip the beginning and the end of a sentence. Two phrases to a sentence, flip them around and you say, I've paraphrased it. But actually you haven't. You've simply taken two exact phrases and you've changed the order of presentation. That in itself is plagiarism as well. So let's get on to a few paraphrasing strategies. And I'm going to go with some older ones first, simply because they're still relevant. Now, most of us will probably use a laptop, but some of us will also probably still be a little bit old-fashioned. And I'm one of those people where I like to write things down. Now, I also advocate the following. When writing a dissertation, we are never going to get it correct from the start. What we are going to do is look to develop a structure that works, that communicates across what we need to have communicated. What we want to do during our editing phase later on is really work on the tone and style, which also means working on choosing the quotes, choosing the paraphrasing, and making sure that our own analysis shines through. So I always advocate, look, if you see something in an article that you like, but you're not yet ready to think how to manipulate it to suit your overall structure, copy it verbatim, put it in there. So an early draft from someone like me will be like an undergraduate essay, lots of direct text. But the key part is not in doing it that way. The key part is in maintaining the notes and the reference and the records so that when you come to refine, when you come to edit, when you come to really be critical of your writing, you know, oh, okay, I copied this one. This is a direct quotation. Now, how do I want to deal with that? So, from the early part, you want to take lots of notes. If you're using software, maybe everything you do is on your computer. Perfectly acceptable, totally up to you. Right from there, you need to make sure that you've got all of the references in there. And from that, you've also got to put in some notes to yourself about how you might or might not want to use it. So I want to go a little bit further because I think as we borrow from other authors, we also need to make sure that we understood why we chose to borrow it. So it's not only, what is said, but it is our intuitive reaction to it and how we feel at the time that we wanted to use it. Now, let's just start with, this is a simple strategy. So write down paraphrases as a source on note cards. So in an article on how to paraphrase, Purdue University Online Writing Lab, which I'm going to say is one of the most fantastic resources out there for, guidance on a lot of the micro points about writing. It's certainly worth looking at, using it as a reference, and it's 100% free. It suggests write your paraphrase on a note card. So that would be taking an individual piece of paper and actually having it referenced down. Now, if we look at Microsoft Word or whatever we're using, we'll be able to track changes and we'll have little blow-up bits that work for that as well. But it also then gives you the opportunity to compare your version with the original. So making sure that you've got the original at every stage until your final edit also means that you can be certain that you've been comfortable with how it has changed. Now, last night when we talked about the reverse outlines, we may find that some of our quotes or some of our paraphrases come into the reverse outline, and how they're used may actually sort of shine up and say, look, this isn't quite right for this moment. So obviously you need to, make sure your note cards are labeled with the authors, etc., but it gives you a reference point. If you're a visual learner, the benefit of this strategy is you can visualize the content you intend to paraphrase, Because a note card is tangible, you can arrange it into outlines, just like I do with literally taking the stapler and little cut up pieces of paper to be able to get my flow before I bother to type everything out properly. Okay. Plus, having a physical copy of paraphrased information also makes it harder for you later to accidentally plagiarize by copying from the original source, because there's always something that you're going to be referencing back to. You can paraphrase from your own point form notes on a source as well. So a guy called Jerry Plotnick from University College at University of Toronto has a very similar strategy, but he suggests that you take point form notes of the text that you want to use in your paper. So don't use the full sentences of what are there. He says capture it as note form. Now that also makes sense to me, because at some stage you're going to be deconstructing. His idea is, look, I really like this quote, but I know I've got to change it. I'm going to deconstruct it into a set of keywords, key phrases, or simple points that I can use. And then later, again, when you come into your editing phase, you're forced to adjust it, because you see, hey, this is not complete sentences. This is not a paragraph. This has some linguistical, I guess, gaps or word gaps within it. So it does become something that can be quite useful to use. We can also look at a few other things. So practicing two-step paraphrasing, which focuses on two areas, the sentence structure and the word choice. And this is the key part. Whenever we're looking at paraphrasing or deplagiarizing or unplagiarizing, whatever the correct word is, we're looking at two levels. We're looking at the structure, because that's what the software checks. And we're looking at the word choice, because that gives us the nuanced meaning. Now, I've got here, some really simple stuff about basic sentence structures in English. And it really comes down to the fact that we have four general types of sentences. A simple sentence, it was difficult. A compound sentence, it was difficult, but she knew there was no going back. A complex sentence, which just sort of changes the structures a little bit. Although it was difficult, she knew there was no going back. Or compound and complex, although it was difficult, she knew there was no going back, so she kept calm and carried on. Ultimately, all that matters here is, as we look at the different types of sentences, the different types of sentence structures, we've got to think about, as we want to paraphrase individual authors or multiple authors, because we might have two or three that we want to bring together, we've got to think about, should we be changing the sentence structure that we've got? If they have, for example, a simple structure that we want to copy, can we utilize and create that to something that might be a complex structure through the inclusion of a contribution from a different author, or perhaps our own commentary or addition to that particular sentence as well? So knowing how the sentences are structured also helps us to think about, what am I going to do with the words? Because I need to look at not only my words, but I need to look at realigning sentence structures through paraphrasing to avoid there being issues of or accusations of plagiarism. Another thing you can do is look at varying the use of active and passive voice. Now, generally speaking, and I think my example here is really way too boring, But active and passive voice is about the choice of words and the choice of order of words in a sentence. Active voice is direct to the point. Passive voice delays the understanding or the key point within the sentence. Now, some academics say, look, you can switch in your paraphrasing from active to passive or passive to active, which might work okay. But you've also got to think, and my last sentence is, in what voice are you writing your dissertation? So if you are extremely active and direct to the point, you don't want to paraphrase something passively. You want to make sure that it is active. But if the words or the phrases that you've got to paraphrase from are passive, then of course you can fit them into an active style. But it's really important to look at your overall voice as guiding how you want to think about that. You want to look at simple things like varying the sentence lengths. And that's why if we go back, now the difference between a simple and a complex sentence. I can break a complex or even a compound sentence. I can break it into 2 or 3 simple sentences. That means my structures have changed. That means my overall approach, my tone, because as I make something short and simple, it changes the tone for us as readers as well. So look at the sentence lengths. You have that really good opportunity to be able to bring it, to be able to bring it to a different level. You have an opportunity to take 2 or 3 sources and bring them together as a very complex sentence, but in one that just becomes a longer sentence that brings in those 3 things, and then references to the 3 different contributors to that sentence. And likewise, you've got the opportunity to literally deconstruct or change. And varying the word choice, of course. So now we want to talk about how we go about varying word choice. So we can use synonyms or words that mean the same thing. So simple example here, the need for investors to earn a commercial return may put upward pressure on prices. So may becomes is likely to. Now, this isn't me jumping into the thesaurus as such. This should be common sense initial changes. And put upward pressure on is push up. Now, you'll notice a difference between the left and the right. What is the major difference in tone between the source text and the paraphrase? Anybody want to give me a quick suggestion on what it is? I've put you to sleep already? Okay. If we look at the source text, it's somewhat more formal or serious tone. In the paraphrase, it's actually gone a little bit more light or less formal. So push up is an informal term, whereas put upward pressure on is considerably more a formal terminology that gets to be used. So again, when you're paraphrasing, make sure that you are comfortable with how your paraphrase changes the tone of the work that you've got. If we look at this, we can change the form of certain words. So privatization has failed, where we change it to be the failure of. Now, it means exactly the same thing, and it's using the same base word. We're not like the previous one where we've changed the words quite significantly. We're actually using the same, but we're either looking at past tense, present tense, future tense, and we're adjusting associated with that. So the second example, the region sub-Saharan Africa, is widely perceived as risky by investors. So investment in the region is considered a significant risk. Same thing, but we're using those core words, but we're just using them in a different format. We can change the grammatical structure as well. Okay, and what we've got is while many governments have taken steps to implement privatization programs, progress has been slower than was anticipated in the early 1980s. So as a paraphrase, I want to keep the tone, and this one has kept the tone really nicely. According to Bayliss, 2003, although the implementation of privatization programs has been a priority for many governments, progress in the area has not been as rapid as expected in the 1980s. So they've actually just changed the structure of grammar for the sentence, but they've kept the tone and the topic that has worked the best.
Great.
Yep.
Sorry, the slide before, the one more. Yeah, this one.
Yep.
The bottom one, right? I just wonder, because the paraphrase, the bottom one, the region is widely perceived as risky, but the paraphrasing is changed to significant risk.
Yeah.
The word significant to me gives a perception that it's like, wow, it's so high. Whereas if I were to read the source text, it's just like, oh, it can be moderate risk.
That's a really cool question. I'm going to say I get why you asked that question. Risk, when we modify the word risk with significant, we expect it to be a heavy word. I think that's the easiest way I want to put it. When I use the word risky, it already has an informal implication that it's actually quite strong. So risky itself translated to significant risk is not a giant leap. It's actually closer than you would think. But you're right to ask and you're right to challenge whether that would be that. In this case, if you feel you look here, widely perceived as risky, which, even widely perceived tells me risky is bigger than normal. But if you're concerned about that, what you can then do is adjust what you have on the right-hand side. So investment in the region is considered a current risk, for example. Now that's going to change because that now gives me a time frame versus perhaps a scenario. But you can look at the word that modifies the actual word that you're adjusting. So significant is quite strong. We can use a softer word to be able to reflect that. So the point that you made is right, but I'm going to say, the fact that we have widely perceived risky, that actually is reasonably close to significant. But imagine if we were talking about statistical data, of course, the two would not translate as well.
All right. Yeah. So I guess maybe if we had the whole, if you were reading the whole article, then yeah, it may drive that point that it is a significant risk, maybe. Yeah.
You get that. I mean, the key thing is we have to look at the words around it. And you're right. The whole article gives us even more of the tone, and that's why the question that was a hangover from yesterday, it is very much about reading for context in order to be able to utilize for our context. So yeah, I've got simple sentences here. If you'd read the whole exciting article, I don't really think it's that good, and I know who the author is actually. I don't think it would be, I think that would give us a lot more of a help. The key thing is, this is why even the thesaurus, it uses direct, simple alternatives. We've got to look at the nuance of each word. And I'm really glad you asked that question because, to be honest, I didn't think about that. But you've asked a very valuable question because it really does take us the potential that we may have changed a little bit of the meaning that we've got. Okay, let's just go, this is the one that I just did. Okay, let's go into using several techniques. And this is really just about, involving everything together to be able to adjust. So, the privatization of such strategic industries has raised a number of concerns. Firstly, these enterprises are usually monopolistic and, in the absence of competition, require effective regulation if private ownership is to be beneficial for the wider economy. Now, he's changed it and gone to, due to the vital role they play in a country's infrastructure, it is essential for the operation of privatized water utilities to be regulated effectively. This is because they usually have a monopoly, and without competition, there is no incentive to keep tariffs low or provide a high standard of service. Now, the funny thing here is those two feel so extremely different. They are talking exactly about the same thing, but it's done in such a way you would not think the two have been copied in any format. Now, I've got a few examples that we'll do in a couple of minutes where I'm going to ask you to look at what you can do to change those as well. I just want to go through a couple of points on this one. So in that particular example, the order in which information is presented is different in the paraphrase, and it's significantly different. Should not use significantly. It is majorly different from the original text. We have different word forms in the same word family have been used. So effective regulation becomes regulated effectively. Synonyms have been used. So in the absence of competition becomes without competition. And bringing it all together, you get a really good transformed paragraph that then you've obviously put the reference to. Now, successful paraphrasing requires the use of multiple techniques each time. It's not sufficient to simply replace keywords, synonym, I hate that word. And, this is a common mistake that a lot of students make. So changing the structure is important. Maintaining your style or your brand of writing. And okay, I'm probably going to say that 5 or 6 more times tonight, but maintaining your brand of writing is extremely important. So I want to guide you towards something. And of course, when this is emailed to you in a couple of days, you'll be able to immediately look at this. But I found that this was a fantastic reference handbook to help you along the paraphrasing and deplagiarizing journey. So I wanted to just mention it here to draw your attention to it, because I think if you're looking for a quick reference guide that's going to help you, this is a really great one. Now, I'm going to get you guys to do some work. We're coming up on a break, which is fine. What I want you to do is at least try one. I've got 4 exercises. I want to try one before the break. We'll have a break, but I'll put up the second one. I would like to ask, I think you guys, there's 4 of us here tonight, I'm not sure. Either work together as a group or work in pairs. This is out of a publication from today. Okay, so for those of you who are in Malaysia, you'll be aware that there is some issue within higher education. You will be aware that Lim Kok Wing University lost accreditation for 8 PhD programs, and up to 600 international and local students have spent 5 years studying a PhD, which they are no longer able to earn. So you'll be aware there's some, debate around that. Now, this is an area that interests me because I'm interested in education policy. It's also an area that interests a friend of mine who is a pro-vice chancellor of a local university. And I borrowed some of his paragraphs tonight, and I'll show you quickly the 4. They get a little bit longer, and they get a little bit more complex. Now, ironically, the shortest one is at the end, but it does not make it the easiest. What I'd like you to do is work together, and I want you to paraphrase this to make sure that the same meaning is coming across. So I want you guys to just give a little bit of a try, but more importantly, I want you to tell me what your strategy is. So it's not just tell me what you wrote, tell me what your strategy is before you even tell me what you write. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to talk with each other and think, what are the ways that you will be able to do this? And then come back and tell me, A, what the ways were, but show me a rewritten version of this. Okay, so you guys work together on this, and at 9:01, we'll come back and discuss it.
Hello, people.
Hi.
Yeah. So,
I guess this first slide is talking about the role of this OFS.
yeah, haven't finished reading.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Yes, you haven't finished reading.
Okay. So it's basically about the role of this OFS. And then,
Yeah, I don't understand the first sentence though.
yeah, why independence is important? Like, is it
Yeah, whose independence?
students?
Okay, so if you've got to make an assumption here, I mean, I'll tell you the answer, but if you've got to make an assumption, what is the key topic or the key feature, the key personality of this paragraph?
The role of OFS?
Yeah. So there, in the independence of that office is important. Now, I could give you the full source and you can spend 10 minutes reading it, but I'll just help you with that. So that's a really good point. And this is, again, sometimes when we take something, we don't, especially if we're taking it through a different source, we don't always get the context 100% right. So it was a really good question that you asked. I don't get what it means. And it's a short sentence. And you have to now ask yourself, do I actually need that sentence? Independence is important. Do I need that sentence as part of my paraphrasing, or can I ignore it altogether?
I think it can be combined together.
Because in the
Right.
second
Yeah,
sentence there's
combined
already
with
the
the
word
second sentence,
independent.
right?
Yeah. So you've got an opportunity to decide how do you want to do it, because you could bring all of this into one sentence, or you could take those effectively 3 sentences and make 5. So I'm going to shut up for a moment and let you guys back to this, and then I'll look forward to seeing what you put forward.
I'll just speak my idea first. So what I'm thinking is taking those important points, and then we just make sure like this important points is inside the new paraphrase that we want to. And I think for this one, it's something like it is important for the office for students to be independent, so that to ensure like the students' right or is protected or something like that. Yeah. How about
Yeah, agree. I mean, I guess there's like 3 things, right? 3 roles. It is an independent regulator.
you? Yes.
It is
The role is to ensure like students' protection or students' right.
students protection, yes, and students education experience or experience in higher education.
I think that's where you're spot on. So although the key subject is the role of the office for students, the key purpose of this sentence the key purpose of this statement is about protecting rights of students. And you know what's great about how you've just said that? None of this tells me protecting rights of students. So you're using a whole new terminology compared to previous. So you've hit the nail on the head. Use that to be the starting point for what you've got. Now, we're at 9:01. I'm going to take a bathroom break. You guys feel free to do as well. When we come back in 5 minutes, let's just wrap this particular activity, this particular paraphrase up, and see what you guys come up with. So do feel free to share it in the chat box or wherever is convenient, okay? But I'll see you back in 5 minutes. If I can just make a comment on what you've put in the chat box, Darlena. You've got...
That's not completed. I accidentally
Okay.
pressed enter.
No. The sentence itself is a really nice transformation. What's lacking is a very specific context reference. So this is an article about Malaysian higher education and the current challenges it faces. But there's a very specific context reference in the paragraph that gives us a very different hint, geographical perspective on things. I know you accidentally pushed enter, that's cool, but
So that's in
the
England.
sentence you've got, I'm just highlighting something missing.
So we should mention England somewhere there.
Well, if you fail to mention England, could I comfortably assume that we're talking about Malaysia?
Hmm.
You know, that might be me, you know, again, that's me making a mistake in the reading, but it's because I haven't been told the specifics. So that's one to think about. I'll give you a couple more minutes and then we'll come back and then we'll move on to the next one as well.
Could we switch it around to put for overseeing students' protection and rights for rewarding education?
Can I challenge you on that? The moment you said overseas students, that's a whole different meaning again.
Yeah. Overseas,
Overseas is not just England.
yeah. I've put in a new sentence. Please comment on that. Thank you.
Oh, I didn't mean overseas students. I was just reading the sentence above.
Okay, it's important for the Office for Students to be independent to protect university students. Okay, so now we're talking about England, but we're not bringing it back to Malaysia. So we've lost a little bit of context. What I think you need to focus on is the fact that an Office for Students is an independent regulator that helps to protect students' lives. That's the core. Now, in England, students' rights are protected by the Office for Students. Oh, whoops, I've just paraphrased it for you. Okay, so this is the thing. Every time we paraphrase, there's so much context with it that we've got to make sure we don't step outside of that context, that we can summarize it neatly, as possible as well. So since I paraphrased that one for you, would you guys like to move on to the second one?
Can?
Okay, let me just share my... Oh, I need to turn my camera on again, and I need to share my screen. Yeah. See, I hate this technology. It's so unfair. Okay, this one, and now I don't know how to get that screen back again. Fantastic. I want to cry. Okay, this one is a little bit longer. At almost all universities in Malaysia, they are often concealed from students and staff to prevent them from taking action under existing regulations and knowing their rights in an open and transparent manner. When students sign up for courses, they're often bound by waivers for course changes due to unforeseen circumstances, or are excluded from seeking outside help due to non-disclosure agreements and no liability clauses in student contracts. Students are also often actively or passively threatened. Okay, I want to make an observation before you start. The second sentence in this paragraph is so long. If we try to paraphrase that and keep it as one concept, we are going to be killing ourselves. So look at breaking it down. Look at asking yourself, what does the first sentence mean? And do I actually need to incorporate it? What's the key point here? Universities protect themselves, universities threaten students. And don't go that simple, by the way, please. Okay? But think about that, but think about how can, especially that second sentence, how can I make that seem easier for somebody to understand? So just have a chat and see what ideas, put anything you want in the chat box, and then I'll come back to it in a minute.
Sorry, Craig. The
Sorry,
first sentence.
yeah.
What does they are often concealed? What's they?
My
They
question
are
is actually
Okay, so actually sentence 1 is explained by sentence 2. So the word waivers, so at almost all, let me rephrase the first sentence if I was writing it. At almost all universities in Malaysia, waivers are often concealed from students and staff to prevent them from taking action. So when you registered for your PhD and you got a lot of paperwork, most universities, actually the world over, to be honest, most universities don't actually expect you to read everything to trust them. So sometimes you'll be signing away your rights. So that's what that first sentence means. So the second sentence gives a really good context to it, but it actually almost replaces it. So the only key point in the first sentence is concealed.
So basically, the first sentence and second sentence are meaning the same thing, right? Just that the second explain
okay.
further.
There's probably an 80% overlap of content. So you could bring the two sentences together with one simple sentence and actually get the same meaning out of it. So the second sentence gives more examples, if that helps. But maybe we don't need to have so many examples. You guys talk to each other. Don't just talk to me. I want to see what you guys come up with before I do something more to think about, okay?
I guess it's saying that universities are not there's no transparency for the students from the university, right?
Yeah, they are like, how to say? They are like protecting themselves. So
Yeah, universities are protecting themselves, and by
by listing all the waivers, all the terms and conditions. So,
yeah, by not being transparent with students.
I always have problems with paraphrasing. My God.
Can I ask you a question? What word could I use instead of transparent in this text?
Not honest. Lie.
What's a
Not
research?
horribly lie.
Yeah, you're right. But what's a research-based word that we would use?
Oh,
Starts with E.
A.
E. For egg. Existentialism.
What's that? Sorry?
The word I'm thinking of starts with the letter E. It ends with fix.
Ethics.
You don't get it now, I'm going.
Ethics.
Thank you. So actually, we could replace transparent with ethical. Just wanted to help you along for a minute.
So it means like the universities are not being ethical in this issue by keeping and not keeping the information away by implementing all this waiver, all this something like that.
By withholding information from students.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're moving in the right direction. But what we're using now is some different words. Okay, let me give you a sort of a summary of this sentence. Many universities do not act in an ethical manner. Students are asked to sign course waivers that remove liability to the university. Sometimes students have also been threatened.
Yeah, that sounds much better.
Well, this is my topic area, so I should be good at it, right? But that's a paraphrase, and it's actually about half the length that's been used there. Okay, let's move down to another one. There's two more. There's this and a short one, but I do really want us to really think it through, okay? So MQA accreditation and reaccreditation audits are essentially document checks and interviews with stakeholders to assess whether a course complies with MQA's minimum requirements. That sentence in itself is a very simple definition of a concept, which is an audit. Okay? They are mostly routine, so if a course fails, it often reflects a lack of interest from internal stakeholders such as managers and teaching staff in providing the required material to meet minimum standards. So this is saying who might be at fault. So internal stakeholders contribute, I'm not meant to do the answer for you.
A minute.
Take a few minutes. I'm not making it easy for you on purpose, but I want to see how you can approach, because the whole thing about paraphrasing is we're going to come across it in so many different contexts. Even when someone tells us a story and we retell the story to someone else, we paraphrase that story. Same with a joke in many cases. So being able to take something that's of A, current news, which it is today, B, we're all in higher education and this impacts us directly. And as PhD students and soon to be doctors, you should be able to talk about how your course is approved. You might think, oh my God, why? But it's really important that you've got an awareness of this type of thing as well as a student. So I'm going to back off for 3 minutes, let you guys talk, see what you come up with.
It sounds like it's a regular audit, and suppose it's something that can be done. I mean, like, not to say easily, but not a problem. So if it fails, it's mostly because the stakeholders didn't put the effort to provide the required material.
Yeah, I think like poor management and maintenance of the curriculum, or to comply with MQA's requirements or audit and things like that. Yeah.
So
How about internal stakeholders? Just now he started the sentence.
yeah. So
Internal stakeholders contribute to the success of accreditation and reaccreditation audits.
Yeah, but in this case, they didn't. Internal stakeholders did not.
We can put it the other way around also, right? Because in this case, if they did not, like, if they are of interest, then you couldn't meet the minimum standards. But like the WS said just now, so they are the one that can contribute to the success. So,
Okay.
As in, they are the ones responsible
yeah.
to contribute to the success of an audit.
Yeah.
What's
So what do we start? Internal stakeholders are responsible for
Internal stakeholders contributes to the success of accreditation and reaccreditation.
correct? MQA. Must include MQA.
QA.
Contribute to, I think, should be better.
Yeah. So internal stakeholders contribute. Oh gosh, my spelling contributes to the success of MQA accreditation process. No. Accreditation audits. Gosh, so big.
Oh, are you typing? Are you
Yeah, I'm
typing?
typing. Yeah, I'm
Ah,
typing.
okay.
Yeah, Darina is typing. So
Internal stakeholders contribute to the success of MQA accreditation audits. Often reflects.
oh no, that one is by often reflects. We just change to contribution. That's okay.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we didn't
Yeah.
use it, right?
So I guess I guess
I guess that's it.
that's it. Yeah.
Is it?
Nope. What we
I'm,
missed?
I'm being purposely unhelpful. Okay, so that sentence that you got, it's spot on, but it hasn't paraphrased every. I need you to. Internal stakeholders contribute to the success of MQA accreditation audits. These should be routine processes for universities.
So
Okay, so that brings the first paragraph back into it. You know, it's essentially a document check and interview with stakeholders. It's a routine process. And it already says routine in the second sentence, right?
Yeah.
So you've given me a really clear sentence, but what you haven't given me is the fact that this is almost a mundane activity for universities. So you haven't given the full context yet. Okay, so that's the change I'd make. Rather than get you typing it out, let's just look at the last one before we move on to the next topic. So part of the solution to look after students' interests is also to look after the interests of faculty and administrative staff who may be working in a toxic, precarious environment. That means they hate their work. So you get 3 minutes on this one, and we'll move through to explaining complex ideas.
We can use the word stakeholders again, like just now, like all stakeholders, which includes
Absolutely.
students, faculty, and
But the stakeholders that we are specifically talking about are in the working environment.
So apart from looking after students' interests, how to say stakeholders?
What's the key part of this sentence?
Other than students, you also have to take care of the staff.
Can I ask it a different way? What is the one most important word in this whole sentence?
Interest?
Nope.
Employees.
Nope.
culture of the
Solution.
university.
Solution. Center your rephrase around the word solution.
Equally important
Let's break it
is
down to really simple things. Solution, students, staff. Solution to protect students is to protect staff. Now that's way too simple, but that's effectively what it is.
So like something like protecting the staff's interests is the key or the solution.
That would work. Protecting staff, not interests, because we're looking at students, but we could say protecting staff environments, for example, may be the solution to ensuring students' interests are maintained. Okay. We're done?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, that's fine. It's a hard one. I know it's a hard one. I purposely wanted it to be hard. I don't want anything to be easy, but I want to challenge you to be able to think about some of the things. And as I said, the reason I chose this particular article, not only is it absolutely current from today, but as research students, you should be aware of what is happening in your university environment. So it's not only, the role of being a research student is not only about being, doing your own research, but it's also taking a broader interest in what's happening in universities. So I just want to sort of subtly push that towards you and empower you a little bit more to think about that. So let's move on and let's talk, excuse me. Let's talk about explaining complex ideas. Now, there's a few different things we can do for this. I am going to leave you at the end of the session with some homework. Now, it's completely up to you whether you do the homework or not. You guys do have a 15-minute consult with me, and this is something that you could share during that, or we can look at anything else, frankly, or you can just email it to me, in terms of sharing how you think about it. I don't think I'm going to give anything that is mind-blowingly exciting. Explaining complex ideas is not this miraculous thing that we do. It's actually some really simple steps to help us through. But I want to have a little bit of fun with it. I want to showcase just some of the things that we can think of. And then I want you guys to have a go. And then what I'd like to do is, rather than do a really, full session on this, because you are getting the notes, and I do want you to do it as an activity, I think I want to leave a little bit of time, maybe from 9:45 onwards tonight, just to do some questions that you might have from the last few days, okay? When we look at explaining complex ideas, there's a couple of things that came to my mind first, more than anything else. The first one is the need to fully understand the concept yourself. In many cases, the reason we cannot explain it to somebody else is because we haven't fully grasped it. That doesn't mean we don't understand it, because we do. What it means is we haven't got every little aspect of it. So for us to be able to deconstruct it in our mind and put it together in a different way makes it a little bit challenging. Now, I think back to when I started my research career and my teaching career. I would embrace things and try to work with them without fully grasping what they were. And that's just eagerness to learn, but it does mean that it takes a longer time to be able to explain or communicate the concept to others, whether it be spoken or whether it be written. So the first thing to think about is, do you fully understand the concept yourself? If not, what are the questions that you need answered? And that's going to help you determine what will other people find troublesome about the topic as well. Now, the flip side of that is the teaching through doing concept. And quite often, the best way to understand a concept is to teach it to someone else. And, although we're trying to communicate it, by being able to explain it what we learn is what are the questions they ask, because where you fail and they ask questions, you can then answer those questions later so that you can explain in a more relevant way that we can use. So, to understand ourselves, the approach is to self-communicate. Now, I want to read a couple of things for you. I'll actually put the correct link there. Sorry, my computer automatically gives titles rather than actual links. So when I have this sent to you, I'll put the link for you. But there is a very good article from one of the major publishing houses, and it took several experienced textbook authors share their best practices for explaining complex ideas in a simple way, including the use of metaphors, visuals, procedures, processes, and hands-on multi-sensory activities to improve learning success. And I wanted to read a couple for you, and I think I'm still going to do that very, very briefly. But I found this really good because there isn't, and although I'm going to give you 6 points to do and eight suggestions, we each have a very different approach to how we do this. So I like this particular article because it shows a variety of academics talking about how they explain complex ideas. So I'm going to start off with Julie Labor, who is an author of an architecture book, okay, very distinctly different from all of us, I believe. Metaphors are my favorite device for explaining complex ideas. They are particularly effective when they can be expressed visually. For example, in our book, we employ the idea of shipping foodstuffs to illuminate the concepts of network packing switching protocols. It goes like this. A food manufacturer's salesperson makes a sale, has no idea how the goods will get to the customer. That's the job of the company's shipping department. The customer isn't concerned with how many boxes are required for shipment or which road the truck takes. He cares only that all of the products arrive timely and in a good condition. If you've understood this, you've just mastered the fundamental idea of packet switched network protocols. The metaphor carries well into the details of the process, which I shall spare you. The best part of visual metaphors is that they can often be illustrated. Don't be afraid to pull out your pencil and make a sketch. With this medium, you have the liberty of making your metaphor humorous or even a bit silly as a supplement to a prosy depiction in the body text. Now, this is something that interests me a lot. When I was back in New Zealand, before I moved to Asia, I was writing a series of first-year business textbooks for students, and we had a very different approach. Instead of lots of words, we used cartoons, and we wanted to be able to explain the basic fundamental theories of business that you learn in your first-year courses through using cartoons and graphs and diagrams. And even for me to be able to write the first book of this, I taught a course using purely diagrams only and no words that I demonstrated or showed to my students. When I talked to Willie, who's one of my colleagues, he was telling me that even when he wrote his dissertation, which is quite some time ago in the 70s, he was using cartoons in every chapter to be able to highlight a particular concept first. It didn't necessarily explain the whole concept, but what it did is it warmed people up to the concept in its existence. So sometimes, we've got the concept of metaphor, but we've also got the fact that a visuality of that is going to help. All you're doing is orienting people towards the way in which you want to think. I think in the absence of time, because we don't have a lot, do have a read of this particular article because it does give some different insights into what we can do and how we can communicate the ideas. I just want to bring the attention to the second paragraph here. Readers have a shorter attention span these days, but the bigger issue is that when you write something that's long, dense, difficult, it doesn't matter if the reader has time or attention. You haven't earned their time yet. They've moved on. So we are looking at condensing and simplifying as part of our strategy. Now, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And there's a story that goes with this. Instead of simplifying a complex idea, I wanted to complicate a simple idea. So these are job descriptions or job titles. What is a petroleum redistribution engineer? Any idea?
Pump gas attendant.
Absolutely. So now you've got that. That's the guy or the girl at the petrol station who pumps gas. So I want to tell you a true story. Some years ago, before I sort of had my own company to do my work permits, I used to do my work permits through a friend's company who was also a client. And he was also an expat, so we both needed a work permit. And in order to get us a work permit, he was the food and beverage storage engineer, and I was the food and beverage quality controller, which basically meant I ate the food and he hid it in the fridge. And it was a little bit of fun for us because we just wanted to play and see what we got. But it was also the fact that a very simple idea can be complicated, just as a very complicated idea can be simplified. Okay, let's do 8 general tips for our writing. First of all, tell your reader why they should care. Why should somebody care about a particular topic? Even though, we think that we write our dissertation for our examiners, but we do write our dissertation for a broader audience. So sometimes you really do need to give them an explanation as to why what you have to say matters. Look at using storytelling techniques to break down difficult topics. How can you use a simple example to be able to express something that other people might find challenging? Now, not everybody is going to need that level in their dissertation, but there may be an opportunity for it. It may be something in terms of your data collection, as say, for example, you speak with respondents in a focus group. This is where a relationship to them on their level is going to be important, rather than just in your writing. So don't always assume that this has to be the dissertation. It can be any time or any of the process involved in getting us to the dissertation. Do avoid jargon and big words. What you want to do first is to be able to explain something so that the average person is going to understand it without the need for a dictionary. Now, again, it doesn't mean don't use jargon, don't use big words, but make sure that as that is there, it itself has been explained in a way that is effective. The more relevant one when trying to explain something complicated is to avoid complex sentences and paragraphs. And if you'll just let me go back a few pages, this to me is a very complex paragraph. And I think if you recall, my verbalization of the paraphrasing of it was to bring it down to 2 simple sentences. So changing from complex to simple structures of writing helps a lot, because not everybody understands or wants to, how do I say it, wants to put up with our choice of words. Be very focused on what you're doing. You're there for one idea only. Don't add any additional complexities to what you're doing. Really strip it down to the one thing. Subsequently, if you want to add a different layer, then deal with that layer separately. Now, it's easy to say ask a non-expert friend to read it for you. That's kind of logical. And it's a really good idea because, again, I come back to the job of a PhD student is to develop communication skills to a broad variety of stakeholders. So by getting somebody from that broad variety to look and say, look, this is what I'm missing, or this is what I don't get, it's actually going to help you in a lot of ways. We say it differently, and it's okay, there's a lot of things that we can look here, but how we choose to speak something and how we choose to write something is very different. So when I write, especially if I write for media, which I tend to spend more time doing lately, I write as if I'm having a conversation with myself. Now, that doesn't mean that's the end product. What it means is that gives me the structures, that gives me some of the frameworks, and then I spend my time adjusting it so it sounds a bit more professional. But I'm effectively trying to speak anything before I write it. The same actually works when I try to do an article, and the same even worked when I do book chapters and even back to my dissertation. It was about talking myself through it. Sometimes it's the crazy side of me talks through it in my head. Sometimes I put it into a recording device so that I can get it later. But as we talk to ourselves, it actually helps us to develop that. So say it before you write it. And finally, read examples from fellow experts. Now, I think that's pretty self-explanatory in that context. The problem we have as researchers, as students, as academics, and as emerging professionals is we suffer from what's called the curse of knowledge. So when we look at how we want to explain something, we often do it in the way that is best for us, not for the audience that we're going for. And this is the first problem that we encounter. We effectively know too much about our topic. And because of that, we're going to make assumptions about our audience's knowledge. We're going to take shortcuts in our explanation or use jargon. Now, earlier with the 4 paraphrasing examples, I made an assumption about your knowledge. My assumption was that as PhD students within the university environment, you would be aware of some of the issues that impacted you. By default, you would be aware of some of the terminology or the thoughts that go with it. Now, that might be a correct or an incorrect assumption, but it is an assumption I made, which I already found out from you guys. You weren't quite as aware as I thought you might be, which is okay, learning curve for all of us. But it comes back to, as we're trying to do something, I'm just simply assuming that you're at that level, or you've got that knowledge, or you've got a particular understanding, which you may not have. And when we're trying to explain something to others, that's always going to be the risk that we take. Secondly, we tend to relay concepts to others in a manner we are most comfortable receiving the information. So whether we write it or we say it, we tell other people the way that we would teach ourselves. Now that's where we have to listen and find, well, what actually are they saying? So these two communication habits actually make it difficult for our audiences to understand and learn learn from us from a starting point. So rather than start drafting your writing by asking, what do I want to say? Start by asking, what does my audience need to hear? Or more importantly, what does my reader need to read? So to answer this, first think about how and what your audience knows, how they go about knowing this. Remember, their learning process might be different from yours. Now, that's a challenge. There's thousands of different approaches to learning. But if we think that there's something other than our own, if we can think outside of our personal paradigm, we actually run a really good chance of hitting it right for some others. So it helps us to think about what to include that we might have left out, in different ways of explaining, such as stories and images. So I'm going to give a very simple approach, and I'm going to show this in a diagram, actually. I'm going to send you the link to this article because I also think this is really worth looking at it. But there are 6 simple and effective tools that we can use to be able to break down something that we are doing, something that we are writing, something we want to explain, and make it easier for somebody else. Now, these 6 are in the graph that I'm about to put up, but I'll just move into the graph because I think that's so much better. Number 1 is diagram. So draw it as a diagram, a mind map, set of process flows, any sort of charts, anything pictorial that is going to help you look at what is there. Sometimes it's easier to explain a diagram because all the unique parts are separated out for you then to be able to order and present to somebody else. And you can take a very simple sketch. And if you remember, what I read from that author was doing a visualization, getting out the pencil and drawing something. And then she leaves her publisher to make it more sensible. But from that drawing, you're able to more easily explain what you've got. Now, the diagram here actually is a really good article, or comes from a really good article about how to shoot a bow and arrow. And each of the examples relates to the same element as what are some of the important components. Now, it doesn't mean you pick one of these only and that's going to work fully for you. You might want to engage with 2 or 3 of these in order to help us. But what it does is it gets you thinking about what you need to write about in a way that is different to how you would have typically thought about it. So the second one is deconstruct. So dissect your concept. Start at small points and then expand. So maybe, it's a list, it's a set of layers or a set of stages that you go through. How does the information evolve? Think of it like an onion, you get a different layer each time. The third one is compare. So what are the similarities or differences to something already known? And this is where the metaphors come in, or analogies or stories. But if I can explain something to you by showing you something you already understand and then drawing links between it from that concept to what I'm trying to get across, not only are you going to understand it, but because it's been connected to something else that's already in your mindset, it's actually giving you an extra point for recall later on. Number 4, picture, is a little bit different to number 1, diagram. So diagram is about having flows or about mind mapping and so forth. Picture, I guess, is in some way what that author was also talking about. It's draw an image that represents the concepts. So use illustrations, use photos, use drawing. And in this case, we've got a picture of a lady holding a bow and arrow in the right position. Unfortunately, she's missing the arrow. Not sure whether that's intentional or not. But many of us think through art over and above thinking through text or thinking through words. So sometimes this has an option to help you. When you teach, you'll use a variety of techniques. Many of these are teaching techniques as well. So, the opportunity to draw, to sketch something, to doodle even, helps you to be able to, I don't want to use deconstruct as in number 2, but it helps you to unpack your understanding and to think about, what do I need to repack to explain it to somebody else? Number 5 is a backward map. And this is where you start at the end, you discuss how you got there. Effectively, you're reverse engineering. So last night we talked about the reverse outlines for a little bit of time. And the reverse outline is taking our whole thesis, condensing it based on things, and seeing whether the narrative made sense. Sometimes when we just take the essence of every element and we bring that together, we condense it or concertina it or whatever into a smaller unit, it helps. Sometimes when we go from the reverse, we're here today, but what led us to each of these things? It actually makes a more appropriate explanation or appropriate way that we can share with others. And the final one is chunking, where you simply group concepts together, explain how they relate. So, different components make a different contribution. You don't have to explain an idea as a whole. You can explain elements of the idea so that they are understood. Let people think through, or from your writing, build up an understanding of every element and then bring them together. By that time, the natural conclusion should actually be an explanation in its own right. So these are 6 tools that I think are worth exploring. I'm leaving you with a challenge. This is your turn, okay? If you want to. This is homework if you want to. It's something we can discuss next week, etc. if you want to. But using any 2 of the 6, try and explain something complicated from your research or from your reading. Okay, we are done with the content for today. We're done with the content actually for the 3 days. I'm very happy to take any questions that you may have. I'm also happy if you email me questions afterwards to respond to those separately as well. Is everyone still alive?
Guess so.
Well, I'm going to ask you if you could turn your camera on for this last couple of minutes, because you I don't think I've ever seen before. I might be wrong.
Huh? We have seen during the last webinar.
I've seen you. Yeah, I know that. You haven't even changed your bookcase. At least I changed mine. Come on.
Okay, let me change my
I
background.
move my furniture around every few weeks, so it's a little bit different. You don't have to change, don't worry, I'm only teasing you. Oh, we're at the beach. It's 10 o'clock at night. Which country has a beach that looks like that and is so bright? That we can't even get to.
We couldn't go.
We're not allowed to do anything
stay
like
at home.
So, okay, if there's any questions, I'm happy to address them now. If there's not, you've got a 15-minute slot with me for, I think we'll probably schedule that for next week. Gitara will be making those arrangements, and I'll update you tomorrow with my availability next week anyway. But I look at those individual consultations as not just an opportunity to ask me anything about what I've talked about the last few days, okay? It's to ask anything that's on your mind that you want some advice on, or you want a second opinion on, or you want to think through. But what I ask, if you want me to read something in advance, email it to me a day or so before so I can take a quick read of it first, and then we can go straight into the discussion of it as we have that 15-minute slot. I know that the last 3 nights has not been the most exciting content that there is, but it is content that is important for us to know as we develop as researchers. So I hope that out of the experience, there's some new things that you've thought about, that you've learned, or that you've realized you've got to embrace as part of your journey, no matter what stage you're at. So I hope that that's been useful. I will be emailing in a couple of days to Katara all of the slides, so they will be sent to you. And I think you've been recording, right? So the recordings are available to everybody subsequently as well. Okay. Katara, for that, what I will do is I'll send you a link to the recording I played on the first night, because I think that will give a slightly better quality and less outputting for you as well.
Yep.
Okay. So,
Dr. Craig, I emailed you a question. Were you able to address it in the beginning of the lecture because I came in a bit late?
Yes, I did address it.
Okay, I'll watch the re-recording. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. As soon as the recording's there, I went through. I did have a question about what I think it means, but I believe that I got it right. If when you watch the recording, it still doesn't ask your question, just drop me an email, okay? But
sure, thank you very much.
Interpret specifically what you were wanting to get at. So in that case, have a look. If it doesn't answer, just drop me another line. We can sort that out. Plus, we can also talk about that specifically during the 15-minute consult. Okay, what I'm just going to ask you to do is the very old-fashioned, can we have a group photo? Yeah, that's my way of doing a group photo, okay? I know I could push print screen, but I've got 2 screens and it really doesn't work, so I just like to do it on my camera. So 3, 2, 1, smile. Oh, you're in the garden, Katara. Lucky you. Thank you very much. I'll send that through so you guys can have a copy. Let me just check. I'll send it through so you can have a copy as well if you'd like it. Thanks very much for your patience over the last 3 nights. It's sometimes very difficult to teach boring subjects, but at the end of the day, there's stuff that needs to be there. So I hope you've benefited from it. I look forward to having the one-on-one sessions, and I'm always open through my email. So take care. I don't know, Katara, you might have some administrative.
Yes.
Thank
I'm going
you
to
so
disappear
much,
for that. Night. See you guys. Take care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Craig. I guess the administrative stuff is the same as the first series. Basically, just to fill up the feedback form to receive your e-cert and your receipt. And also, I will be reaching out to you regarding your one-to-one session. So you'll just have to fill in the Excel once it's ready. Okay, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you guys enjoyed the past 3 days. Thank you and good
Thank
night.
you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you,
Good night.
Ramon.
Thanks. Bye.